The security camera footage would later show exactly 11:47 p.m. when Sofia Morales made the decision that would change her life forever. But let me back up. 3 hours earlier, Sofia was on her knees in the marble bathroom of the presidential suite, scrubbing vomit from behind a toilet that cost more than she made in 6 months. The guest, a tech billionaire's spoiled son, had thrown a party that ended with champagne bottles shattered against Italian marble and worse things I won't describe. Her supervisor, Rick Donovan, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, his beer gut straining against his cheap polyester shirt. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing to a stain that wasn't there 5 minutes ago. "And when you're done here, the penthouse needs a complete turnover." New guests arriving at 6 a.m. Sofia looked up from the floor, her dark hair falling out of its ponytail, her knees raw from kneeling on the hard tile. "Mr. Donovan, my shift was supposed to end 2 hours ago. I have to catch the last bus." "Your shift ends when I say it ends." His voice was sharp, cutting. "You got a problem with that? There's 50 other girls who'd love your job." Sofia bit her tongue. She'd heard this threat 100 times. Maybe 1,000. She was 23 years old. She'd been in America for 4 years, ever since her parents died in a car accident back in Honduras and left her with nothing but a suitcase and a phone number for a cousin in New York who barely spoke to her anymore. Hotel 1 was her world now. 12-hour shifts that turned into 14-hour shifts. Minimum wage that somehow never felt like enough, even though she lived in a studio apartment the size of most people's closets and ate rice and beans 6 days a week. But every Friday, without fail, Sofia walked to the Western Union on 47th Street and sent $200 home to her grandmother. Abuela Maria was 78, diabetic, and living alone in the mountains outside Tegucigalpa. Those $200 kept her alive. Sofia never missed a payment. Not once in 4 years, even when she got pneumonia and worked through it because she couldn't afford to miss a day. Even when she twisted her ankle so badly she could barely walk but still showed up because sick days were unpaid. Even when Rick docked her pay for things that weren't her fault, like the time a guest claimed she'd stolen a watch that was later found in his luggage. The hotel didn't care. The guests didn't care. Rick Donovan definitely didn't care. To them, Sofia was invisible. Just another brown face in a gray uniform, pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies through hallways that smelled like money and privilege. She was furniture. Background noise. Easily replaceable. But Sofia had learned to be invisible. It was safer that way. She kept her head down, did her work, smiled when spoken to, and never complained. Not when guests snapped their fingers at her like she was a dog. Not when they left messes that would make a grown man cry. Not when they spoke about her in third person while she was standing right there. "The help will clean that up. Make sure the girl gets the stains out." These people are used to cleaning up after others. These people, as if she wasn't human. As if she didn't have dreams, fears, hopes, a family she missed every single day. But Sofia had learned something important during her 4 years of being invisible. She saw everything. She saw which guests were kind and which were cruel. She saw which staff members helped each other and which ones threw their coworkers under the bus for a chance at overtime. She saw how the hotel really worked, not the polished version they showed in their marketing materials, but the real version that happened in back hallways and break rooms and managers' offices after hours. She saw Rick Donovan pocket cash from the petty expense fund when he thought no one was looking. She saw him make inappropriate comments to the younger housekeepers, especially the ones who didn't speak much English and were afraid to report him. She saw assistant manager Jennifer Walsh take credit for ideas that came from the front desk staff, then throw those same staff members under the bus when something went wrong. She saw guests who tipped generously, and guests who complained about imaginary problems to get their bills reduced. She saw everything, but seeing and being able to do something about it were two very different things. Sofia finished cleaning the presidential suite at 1:15 a.m. Her back ached. Her hands were raw from chemicals. Her feet were screaming in shoes that were falling apart but were the only work shoes she owned. Rick was long gone, of course. He never stayed past 10 p.m., leaving the overnight staff to handle whatever disasters the guests created. Sofia gathered her supplies and headed for the service elevator. The main elevators were off-limits to staff unless they were accompanying a guest. Another one of Hotel 1's many rules designed to keep the help invisible. The service elevator was older, slower, and smelled like industrial disinfectant and despair. Sofia rode it to the basement, returned her cart to the supply room, and changed out of her uniform in the women's locker room that had been temporarily out of hot water for 8 months. She put on her street clothes, jeans with holes in the knees, a sweater she'd bought at Goodwill for $3, and a thin jacket that used to be black but had faded to gray after too many trips to the laundromat. It was 1:47 a.m. when Sofia finally walked out the staff exit into the December night. The cold hit her like a physical blow. New York in December was brutal, but this year felt worse. The weather app on her cracked phone screen showed 18 degrees, with a wind chill that made it feel like it was below zero. Sofia pulled her thin jacket tighter and started walking toward the bus stop 6 blocks away. The last bus of the night left at 2:15 a.m. If she missed it, she'd have to walk the 4 miles home, which she'd done before but really didn't want to do in weather like this. She was halfway to the bus stop when she heard it. A cough. Weak, wet, desperate. Sofia stopped and looked around. The street was empty except for a few cars passing by, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Then she heard it again. The cough was coming from the alley beside the hotel. Sofia's first instinct was to keep walking. New York City rule number 1, mind your own business, especially at 2 a.m. in an alley. But something made her stop. Maybe it was the sound of the cough, not the deep hack of a smoker, but the shallow wheeze of someone who was really sick. Maybe it was the fact that she'd spent 4 years being invisible and knew what it felt like to be ignored when you needed help most. Or maybe it was just the part of her that remembered being a little girl in Honduras, when her mother would stop to help anyone who needed it, even when they had almost nothing to give. Sofia turned around and walked toward the alley. What she saw made her heart stop. A man was curled up against the brick wall of the hotel, barely visible in the shadows. He was lying on a piece of cardboard that was soaked through from the snow. No blanket. No coat. His shoes were gone, either stolen or lost, and his feet were bare and blue with cold. He looked like he was dying. Sofia had seen homeless people before. New York was full of them. But this was different. This man wasn't just homeless, he was in immediate danger. She could see his breath coming in short, sharp puffs. His skin was gray, almost blue in the dim light from the street lamp. His hair was matted with ice. He was maybe 40 years old, though it was hard to tell. The streets aged people fast. Sofia looked around, hoping to see someone else, someone better equipped to help. But the street was empty. It was just her and this man who was freezing to death 10 feet from one of the most expensive hotels in Manhattan. She checked her phone. 1:52 a.m. If she was going to catch the last bus, she needed to leave now. But she couldn't walk away. Sofia approached the man slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Sir," she said softly. "Sir, are you okay?" He didn't respond. His eyes were closed, but she could see that he was still breathing. Sofia knelt down beside him, ignoring the wet snow soaking through her jeans. "Sir, it's really cold out here. Do you need help?" The man's eyes fluttered open. They were blue, intelligent, but clouded with exhaustion and hypothermia. He looked at her for a moment, confused, like he couldn't quite focus on her face. I'm fine," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Just resting." But he wasn't fine. Sofia could see that his lips were turning blue. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. She looked at her phone again. 1:54 a.m. If she helped this man, she'd miss the last bus. She'd have to walk home in the freezing cold, which would take at least an hour and a half. She'd get maybe 3 hours of sleep before she had to be back at work at 6 a.m. for the breakfast shift. But if she left him here, he might not survive the night. Sofia made her choice. She stood up and walked quickly back to the hotel staff entrance. Her keycard still worked for another hour. They reset access at 3 a.m. The hotel felt different at night. Quieter, but also more hostile somehow. The marble floors that looked elegant during the day seemed cold and unwelcoming in the dim emergency lighting. Sofia took the service elevator to the 3rd floor and walked quickly to the linen closet. Hotel 1 had strict inventory procedures for everything. Every sheet, every towel, every pillow had to be accounted for. But Sofia knew that they also had a section for damaged goods, linens with stains or small tears that couldn't be used for guests but hadn't been thrown away yet. These items were supposed to be donated to local shelters once a month, but Sofia had noticed that the donations were often forgotten and the items just sat in storage. She found what she was looking for, a thick wool blanket with a small burn hole from a cigarette. The kind of minor damage that made it unusable for a 5-star hotel but perfectly fine for keeping someone warm. Sofia folded the blanket carefully and headed back to the elevator. As the doors closed, she realized she was shaking, not from cold, but from adrenaline. She was breaking the rules. If anyone found out, she could be fired. But she thought about the man's blue lips and kept going. When she got back to the alley, the man was still there, but he looked worse. His breathing was even shallower, and he wasn't responding to her voice at all. Sofia spread the blanket over him carefully, tucking it around his shoulders and feet. The blanket was warm from being inside, and she could see some color return to his face as the heat began to work. She sat with him for a few minutes, making sure he was stable. His breathing became deeper, more regular. The shaking stopped. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, even though she wasn't sure he could hear her. "You deserve to be warm too." The man's eyes opened briefly, and for just a moment, they seemed to focus on her face. His lips moved, like he was trying to say something, but no sound came out. Then his eyes closed again, and his breathing became the deep, steady rhythm of real sleep instead of unconsciousness. Sofia checked her phone. 2:17 a.m. The last bus was gone. She pulled her thin jacket tighter and started the long walk home. The next morning, Sofia arrived at work at 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes early as always. She'd gotten maybe 2 hours of sleep, and her feet were still numb from the walk home, but she was there. The blanket was gone from the alley. So was the man. Sofia allowed herself a small smile as she changed into her uniform. Maybe he'd found somewhere warm to go. Maybe someone had helped him get to a shelter. Maybe he was okay. She was still smiling when Rick Donovan cornered her in the supply room at 7:30 a.m. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. Sofia's stomach dropped. Rick only closed the door when someone was in serious trouble. "Yes, Mr. Donovan, inventory came up short last night. A blanket from the damaged goods section." Sofia's mouth went dry, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "I don't know anything about that, sir." Rick stepped closer, and Sofia could smell the coffee and cigarettes on his breath. "Really? Because Janet in security says she saw you going into the linen closet around 2 a.m. That's after your shift ended. That's after your keycard access should have expired." Sofia's mind raced. She'd forgotten about the security cameras in the hallways. I thought I'd forgotten to log out of the computer system. I was checking." "Cut the crap, Sofia." Rick's voice was sharp. "I know you took that blanket. I know you gave it to some bum in the alley. The question is what we're going to do about it." Sofia felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't give Rick the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "Mr. Donovan, it was damaged inventory. It was going to be donated anyway." "That's not the point." Rick's voice rose. "The point is you stole hotel property. You made that decision without authorization. You used your keycard after hours without permission." He pulled out a piece of paper, a formal write-up. "Corporate policy is clear. Theft of hotel property is grounds for immediate termination." Sofia's knees went weak. She couldn't lose this job. Despite everything, the long hours, the terrible pay, Rick's harassment, she needed this job. Without it, she couldn't send money to her grandmother. Without it, she'd have no way to pay rent. "Please, Mr. Donovan. I'll pay for the blanket. I'll work extra shifts. The blanket cost $80 retail. But that's not the real issue." Rick seemed to be enjoying this. "The real issue is trust. How can I trust someone who steals from the hotel?" "I didn't steal. You took hotel property without permission. That's theft." He held up the write-up. "I should fire you right now. In fact, I probably will. But I'm feeling generous today." Sofia waited, afraid to hope. "I'm not going to fire you. But I am going to dock your pay for the full value of the blanket, plus a penalty for unauthorized use of hotel resources after hours. Let's call it, your entire week's pay." Sofia's heart stopped. "My whole week? But Mr. Donovan, I need that money. My grandmother should have thought about that before you decided to play Mother Teresa with hotel property." Rick handed her the write-up to sign. "This is your official warning. One more incident like this, and you're gone. No severance, no reference, nothing. And good luck finding another job in this city with a theft citation on your record." Sofia stared at the paper. $347. That was her entire week's pay after taxes. Money she'd already mentally allocated, $200 for her grandmother's medication, $60 for her portion of the electric bill, $40 for groceries, $47 for bus fare to get to work. Without that money, her grandmother wouldn't get her insulin this month. Without it, Sofia would have to choose between eating and keeping the lights on. All because she tried to keep a man from freezing to death. "I need you to sign this," Rick said impatiently. Sofia looked up at him. For a moment, she thought about refusing. About telling him exactly what she thought of his policy and his attitude and his petty power games. But she needed this job. She signed the paper. "Good girl," Rick said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Now get back to work. The breakfast rush is starting, and we're already behind." Sofia spent the rest of her shift in a daze. She cleaned rooms mechanically, going through the motions while her mind churned. How was she going to pay for her grandmother's medication? How was she going to make rent? She had maybe $40 in her checking account and another $20 in cash. That wouldn't even cover bus fare for the week. She could ask her cousin Miguel for help, but they'd had a falling out 6 months ago when she couldn't lend him money for his girlfriend's birthday present. He'd made it clear that he considered her a burden, a reminder of the family back home that he was trying to forget. She could try to pick up extra shifts, but the hotel was cutting hours because of the post-holiday slump. There was barely enough work for the current staff. She could look for a second job, but when? She was already working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. Her one day off was spent doing laundry, grocery shopping, and trying to get enough sleep to function. By the time Sofia's shift ended at 6 p.m., she'd made a decision. She would call her grandmother and explain the situation. Abuela Maria would understand. She'd managed before Sofia started sending money regularly. Somehow, they'd figure it out. But when Sofia called from the payphone outside the hotel, her cell phone had been shut off for non-payment the week before. Her grandmother's neighbor answered instead. "Sofia? Thank God you called. Your grandmother is in the hospital." Sofia's world tilted. What happened? Her blood sugar dropped this morning. She collapsed in the kitchen. The doctors say she needs to stay for observation, but the hospital wants payment up front for her medication. Without her insulin, the woman didn't need to finish the sentence. Sofia closed her eyes and leaned against the brick wall of the hotel. How much do they need? $300 American. If we can't pay by tomorrow, they'll discharge her. $300. Almost exactly what Rick had docked from her pay. Sofia hung up the phone and stared at Hotel One's gleaming facade. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see guests in the lobby lounge, sipping cocktails that cost more than she made in a day. Their laughter drifted out onto the street. She thought about the man in the alley. About his blue lips and bare feet. About the way his breathing had steadied when she'd covered him with the blanket. She thought about Rick Donovan's smug smile as he'd docked her pay. She thought about her grandmother lying in a hospital bed, waiting for medication that Sofia couldn't afford to send. For the first time in 4 years, Sofia allowed herself to feel angry. Not just frustrated or tired or sad, actually angry. She was angry at Rick for his petty cruelty. She was angry at the hotel for treating her like she was disposable. She was angry at the system that made it possible for people to freeze to death outside buildings where other people paid $1,000 a night to sleep. But mostly, she was angry at herself for believing that keeping her head down and being invisible would somehow protect her. It hadn't protected her. It had just made her an easy target. Sofia walked slowly back to her apartment, her mind churning with plans she'd never had the courage to make before. She was going to find a way to get that money for her grandmother. And she was going to find a way to make Rick Donovan pay for what he'd done. She didn't know how yet. But for the first time in her life, Sofia Morales was done being invisible. The security camera footage would show that it was exactly 11:47 p.m. when Sofia made the decision that changed everything. But the cameras couldn't capture what mattered most, the moment when a young woman who'd spent 4 years being treated like she didn't matter finally decided to prove them all wrong. What happened next would surprise everyone, especially Sofia herself. Chapter 2. When Justice Finally Listened. If Chapter 1 moved you, wait until you see what happens next. Comment below with your thoughts, subscribe for more incredible stories, and share this with everyone who believes in justice. Sofia had been staring at the ceiling of her studio apartment for 3 hours when her phone rang at 6:47 a.m. She hadn't slept. How could she? Her grandmother was in a hospital bed 2,000 miles away, and Sofia had exactly $63 to her name. The math was simple and brutal. No money meant no medication, and no medication meant. She couldn't finish that thought. The phone kept ringing. Sofia's first instinct was to ignore it. It was probably a debt collector or someone trying to sell her something she couldn't afford. But something made her pick up. Sofia Morales? Yes. This is Janet Walsh from Hotel One Security. Mr. Wynn wants to see you in his office immediately. Sofia's blood turned to ice. Franklin Wynn. The owner. The man whose name was on the building, whose face graced the covers of business magazines, who probably made more money in a day than Sofia would see in her lifetime. She'd never even been to the top floors where the executive offices were. Regular staff weren't allowed up there unless they were being fired for something serious. Did I do something wrong? Just be here in 1 hour. 37th floor. Don't be late. The line went dead. Sofia stared at her phone, her mind racing. This had to be about the blanket. Somehow, word had gotten to the owner that she'd stolen hotel property. Rick Donovan had probably exaggerated the story, made it sound worse than it was. She was going to be fired. Not just written up or disciplined, fired. And with a theft citation on her record, she'd never get another job in hospitality. Maybe not anywhere. Sofia dragged herself to the shower, where the water was lukewarm at best and the pressure was barely a trickle. She put on her cleanest uniform and tried to make herself look presentable, even though she felt like her world was ending. The bus ride to Hotel 1 felt like a funeral procession. Sofia watched the city wake up through the grimy windows, people heading to jobs they probably hated, but at least they had jobs. By this afternoon, Sofia might not even have that. She arrived at the hotel with 15 minutes to spare and took the service elevator to the employee break room to check in with her supervisor. But Rick Donovan wasn't there. Neither was anyone else from housekeeping. Sofia. A woman in an expensive suit was standing in the doorway. Sofia recognized her as one of the executive assistants from the upper floors, someone so far above Sofia's level that they'd never spoken before. Mr. Wynn is ready for you now. Sofia followed the woman to the main elevator bank, the one she'd never been allowed to use. The elevator was all mirrors and gold trim, with soft classical music playing. It felt like being inside a jewelry box. The 37th floor was a different world. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park. The carpet was so thick Sofia's feet sank into it. Everything was cream and gold and crystal, designed to make visitors feel small and intimidated. It was working. The assistant led Sofia down a hallway lined with oil paintings that probably cost more than most people's houses, then stopped at a set of double doors made of what looked like mahogany. He's waiting for you inside. Sofia took a deep breath and knocked. Come in. Franklin Wynn's office was bigger than Sofia's apartment. Maybe twice as big. One wall was entirely windows, offering a view that probably cost $1 million just to look at. The other walls were lined with awards, photographs with celebrities and politicians, and diplomas from schools Sofia had only heard of in movies. Franklin Wynn himself was standing with his back to her, looking out at the city. He was tall, probably in his early 50s, with silver hair and the kind of posture that came from never doubting you belonged in any room you entered. Sofia had seen his picture in magazines and newspapers, but she'd never realized how imposing he was in person. This was a man who owned hotels in 12 countries, who had lunch with senators and donated millions to charity. This was a man who could end her career with a phone call. Sit down, please, he said without turning around. Sofia perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. Do you know why you're here, Ms. Morales? His voice was quiet, measured. Sofia couldn't tell if he was angry or just disappointed. I think it's about the blanket, sir. Franklin Wynn turned around slowly. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept either. When he looked at Sofia, his expression was unreadable. Tell me about the blanket. Sofia's mouth went dry. She'd rehearsed this conversation on the bus, but now her mind was blank. There was a man outside the hotel. He was freezing. I thought he might die if no one helped him. So I took a blanket from the damaged inventory and covered him with it. Mr. Donovan docked my pay for the whole week as punishment. And you think that was fair? Sofia blinked, confused. I don't know, sir. I broke the rules. I should have asked permission first. Franklin Wynn studied her for a long moment. Ms. Morales, how long have you worked at my hotel? 4 years, sir. 4 years. And in those 4 years, how many complaints have been filed against you? Sofia thought carefully. None that I know of, sir. None. In fact, when I reviewed your file this morning, I found quite the opposite. Multiple commendations from guests. A perfect attendance record. Several instances where you went above and beyond your duties to help guests or coworkers. Sofia didn't know what to say to that. So when I heard that one of my most reliable employees had been disciplined for theft, I decided to investigate personally. He walked to his desk and picked up a folder. Do you know what I found? Sofia shook her head. I found security footage of you working until nearly 2 a.m., 3 hours past your scheduled shift, cleaning up after a guest who had trashed the presidential suite. I found records showing that you've never taken a sick day, never been late, never caused any problems whatsoever. He opened the folder. I also found footage of you taking a blanket from damaged inventory, inventory that was already scheduled for donation, and using it to help someone who was dying of exposure outside my hotel. Sofia's heart was pounding. She couldn't tell if this was leading to her firing or something else entirely, but most importantly, Ms. Morales, I found out who that man was. Franklin Wynne walked around his desk and sat down across from Sofia. That man was my brother. The words hit Sofia like a physical blow. She stared at him, sure she'd misheard. Your brother, David Wynne. 43 years old. Harvard MBA. Used to be the smartest person in any room he entered. Franklin Wynne's voice cracked slightly. 5 years ago, David started showing signs of schizophrenia. Paranoid delusions, auditory hallucinations, complete breaks from reality. He refused treatment, convinced that doctors were trying to poison him. One day he just disappeared. Sofia felt tears forming in her eyes. I hired private investigators. Posted missing person reports. Offered rewards for information. Nothing. It was like he'd vanished from the face of the earth. Franklin Wynne pulled out a photograph and handed it to Sofia. It showed 2 boys, maybe 8 and 10 years old, grinning at the camera on a beach somewhere. They looked so happy, so normal. That's David and me when we were kids. He was my little brother, but he was always the smart one. He taught me how to read financial statements when I was 12. He's the reason I got into the hotel business. He said hospitality was about taking care of people when they were far from home. Sofia's hands were shaking as she looked at the photograph. 2 weeks ago, I was walking to my car after a late board meeting when I saw him. Sleeping in the alley beside my own hotel. My brother. Barefoot in December, sick and dirty and broken. Franklin Wynne's voice was barely above a whisper now. I tried to approach him, but he ran. Just like always. The paranoia makes him think everyone is out to hurt him, including me. I've been leaving food and blankets in that alley every night since then, hoping he'd come back. Sofia began to understand where this was going. Last night, when I went to leave supplies, I found him sleeping peacefully under a hotel blanket. For the first time in 5 years, he looked safe. Warm. He wasn't shivering or muttering to himself or looking over his shoulder. He was just sleeping like a normal person. Franklin Wynne looked directly at Sofia. I sat with him for 3 hours. When he woke up, he was lucid. Actually lucid, for the first time since his illness started. He told me about an angel who had covered him with a blanket and told him he deserved to be warm too. Sofia's tears were flowing freely now. He said it was the first time in years that someone had looked at him and seen a human being instead of a problem to be solved or avoided. Franklin Wynne stood up and walked to his window. This morning, for the first time in 5 years, David agreed to come home with me. He's in a private psychiatric facility right now, getting the help he should have gotten years ago. The doctors say his prognosis is good, with proper medication and therapy, he can live a normal life. He turned back to Sofia. My brother is alive and getting help because of what you did. Because you saw someone who needed help and you helped him, even though it cost you something you couldn't afford to lose. Sofia was sobbing now, unable to speak. Ms. Morales, what Mr. Donovan did to you was not just wrong, it was unconscionable. Punishing an employee for an act of basic human decency is not how my hotels operate. He picked up his phone and dialed an extension. Rick? This is Franklin Wynne. I need you in my office immediately. 5 minutes later, Rick Donovan entered the office looking confused and slightly irritated. When he saw Sofia sitting there, his expression darkened. Mr. Wynne, if this is about the theft incident, I handled it according to company policy. Sit down, Rick. Something in Franklin Wynne's voice made Rick's complaints die in his throat. Tell me about company policy regarding damaged inventory donations. Rick shifted uncomfortably. Well, damaged goods are supposed to be donated to local charities on a monthly basis. And when was the last time you organized such a donation? Well, we've been busy with the holiday season. The last donation from this hotel was 8 months ago, Rick. 8 months of damaged inventory just sitting in storage because you couldn't be bothered to do your job. Rick's face was turning red. Sir, I don't see how that's relevant to an employee stealing. Ms. Morales didn't steal anything. She used a damaged blanket that should have been donated months ago to save someone's life. Someone who happens to be my brother. The color drained from Rick's face, but even if that weren't the case, Franklin Wynne continued, your response was completely inappropriate. Docking an employee's entire week's pay for a minor inventory discrepancy. Threatening her job over an act of compassion. I was following protocol. You were abusing your authority. Franklin Wynne's voice was steel now. I've been reviewing your management record, Rick. The turnover rate in your department is 60% higher than any other department in the hotel. You have 12 harassment complaints filed against you in the past 2 years. You've been skimming from the petty cash fund for months. Rick started to protest, but Franklin Wynn held up a hand. Your employment with Hotel 1 is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Don't bother cleaning out your office, we'll mail your personal items to you. Rick looked like he'd been slapped. You can't do this. I have a contract. Your contract includes a morality clause. I'd suggest you read it before calling a lawyer. Franklin Wynn pressed a button on his desk, and 2 security guards entered immediately. Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Donovan from the building. As Rick was led away, sputtering protests and threats, Franklin Wynn turned back to Sofia. Ms. Morales, I owe you an apology. What happened to you should never happen at any of my properties. You were punished for doing the right thing, and that's unacceptable. He handed her an envelope. This is your week's pay, plus a bonus equal to 1 month's salary. Consider it a small token of my gratitude for saving my brother's life. Sofia opened the envelope with shaking hands. The check was for more money than she'd ever seen at one time. But that's not all, Franklin Wynn continued. I've been thinking about what David said, about how you saw him as a human being when everyone else saw him as a problem. That kind of insight, that kind of compassion, is exactly what the hospitality industry needs. He handed her another folder. This is an application for our management training program. Full tuition to the Metropolitan Hospitality Academy, plus a guaranteed management position upon graduation. Starting salary would be 4 times what you're making now. Sofia stared at the papers, unable to process what was happening. I don't understand, sir. I don't have a college degree. I'm just a cleaning lady. You're a young woman who risked her job to help a stranger. You're someone who works 12-hour shifts and still finds energy to care about others. You're exactly the kind of person I want leading my teams. He sat down across from her again. I'm not offering you charity, Ms. Morales. I'm offering you an opportunity. You'd have to work hard, the program is intensive, and the expectations are high. But based on what I've seen of your character, I believe you'd excel. Sofia looked at the check in her hands, then at the application, then at Franklin Wynn's sincere expression. My grandmother, she said suddenly. She's in the hospital. She needs medication that costs $300, and I couldn't afford to send it because Mr. Donovan docked my pay. Call her, Franklin Wynn said, sliding his phone across the desk. Tell her the money is on its way. Sofia made the call through tears, speaking rapid Spanish to her grandmother's neighbor. When she hung up, Franklin Wynn was smiling. She's going to be okay. Yes, sir. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you. You already did. You saved my brother's life when you had every reason to just walk away. That's not something I'll ever forget. 6 months later, Sofia Morales walked through the lobby of Hotel 1 in a navy blue blazer, her new nameplate reading, Floor Manager, gleaming on her lapel. Guests nodded respectfully as she passed. Staff members came to her with questions and problems, knowing she'd listen and help find solutions. She'd graduated at the top of her class from the Hospitality Academy. Her fluency in Spanish and her understanding of what it was like to struggle had made her invaluable in training and supporting the hotel's diverse staff. But the best part of her day was always the same. Every evening at 6 p.m., she walked to the alley behind the hotel, the same alley where she'd found David Wynn 6 months earlier. But now, instead of a man dying of cold, she found something else. A small warming station that she'd convinced Franklin Wynn to install. Heated benches, blankets, and a sign in multiple languages directing people to local shelters and services. And twice a week, David Wynn volunteered there. He was healthy now, stable on medication and living in a supervised apartment. He'd started a non-profit organization focused on helping people with mental illness who were experiencing homelessness. Sofia. David called out as she approached. He was distributing hot soup to a small group of people, his smile bright and genuine. How was your day? Good, Sofia said, joining him behind the serving table. We had a guest complaint about noise from the construction next door, but I managed to get them moved to a suite on the quiet side. And the new housekeeping supervisor is working out really well. That's great. Franklin told me you're being considered for the assistant general manager position. Sofia blushed. It's just a possibility. There are other candidates with more experience, but none of them have your heart, said a familiar voice behind her. Sofia turned to see Franklin Wynn approaching, carrying a box of supplies for the warming station. How's the evening going? He asked. Busy, David replied. Word is getting out about the station. We've helped 12 people tonight. Franklin Wynne looked around at the scene, his brother healthy and helping others, Sofia managing both her hotel duties and volunteer work, people who might otherwise be freezing finding warmth and dignity. You know, he said to Sofia, that night 6 months ago, when you made the decision to help a stranger, you changed more than just David's life. What do you mean? I mean you changed mine too. Before that night, I thought business was just about profit margins and market share. You showed me it's really about taking care of people. He gestured toward the warming station. We're installing these at all 12 of our properties worldwide. We're also implementing new policies to support employees who go above and beyond to help others. And we're partnering with mental health organizations in every city where we operate. Sofia felt tears forming in her eyes. All of that started because you saw someone who needed help and you helped him. Because you refused to walk away when walking away would have been easier. Franklin Wynne handed her an envelope. What's this? Your promotion letter. Congratulations, Assistant General Manager Morales. Sofia opened the envelope with shaking hands, reading the official offer. The salary was more than she'd ever dreamed of making. The benefits included full health insurance and a fund for continuing education. But more than that, the letter outlined her new responsibilities, overseeing staff development, implementing guest service improvements, and managing the hotel's community outreach programs. I get to keep working with the warming station, she asked. It's part of your job description now, Franklin Wynne said with a smile. Corporate social responsibility, reporting directly to me. Sofia looked around at the alley that had changed her life. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible, voiceless, just another employee afraid of losing a job she hated. Now she was a manager, a leader, someone whose opinions mattered and whose decisions affected hundreds of people. But the most important change wasn't in her title or her salary. The most important change was that she'd learned to see herself the way she'd seen David that cold night, as someone who deserved warmth, dignity, and respect. There's one more thing, Franklin Wynne said. David has something he wants to say. David set down the soup ladle and turned to face Sofia directly. 6 months ago, I was dying. Not just from the cold, but from years of being treated like I was invisible, like I was a problem instead of a person. When you covered me with that blanket and told me I deserved to be warm too, you gave me back my humanity. His voice was steady, clear, completely different from the broken man she'd found in the alley. You saved my life that night. But more than that, you reminded me that I was still worth saving. That's a gift I can never repay. He handed her a small wrapped package. But I wanted to give you something anyway. Sofia unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with an inscription. She gave what little she had, and got back more than she ever imagined. It's a reminder, David said, that kindness always comes back. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in the way you expect, but it always comes back. Sofia fastened the bracelet around her wrist, feeling the weight of the words and everything they represented. I have something to tell you both, she said. Last week, I got a call from my cousin Miguel. The one who cut me off when I couldn't lend him money. Franklin and David listened intently. He's homeless now. Lost his job, lost his apartment. He's been living in his car for 2 weeks. What did you tell him? Franklin asked. Sofia smiled. I told him about the warming station. About the job placement program we're starting next month. About second chances and the power of asking for help when you need it. And, he's coming here tomorrow. David's going to help him get into a treatment program for his drinking problem, and I'm going to help him find work. Sofia looked at both men, one who'd given her an opportunity she never could have imagined, one who'd shown her that everyone deserves to be seen as human. 6 months ago, I thought kindness was something you could only afford if you had extra to give. Now I know that kindness is something you can't afford not to give. Because when you help someone else find their way, you find your own way too. As the evening wound down and they began cleaning up the warming station, Sofia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From invisible cleaning lady to assistant general manager. From someone who was afraid to speak up to someone whose voice mattered in corporate decisions. But the real change wasn't in her job title or her salary. The real change was in how she saw herself and how she saw others. She'd learned that everyone has a story. Everyone deserves dignity. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change everything. The bracelet on her wrist caught the light from the street lamp, and Sofia read the inscription one more time. She gave what little she had, and got back more than she ever imagined. It was true. She'd given a blanket to a stranger and received a new life in return. But more than that, she'd learned that kindness isn't about what you can afford to give. It's about what you can't afford not to give. Because in the end, we're all just people trying to stay warm in a cold world. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to share their blanket to change everything. Comment below if this story inspired you. Have you ever helped a stranger and had it change your life? Subscribe for more incredible true stories, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of kindness. The end. Remember, kindness always comes back. Maybe not immediately, maybe not how you expect, but it always comes back.